خشم و شهوت مرد را احول کند خشم و شهوت مرد را احول کند ز استقامت روح را مبدل کند چون غرض آمد هنر پوشیده شد چون غرض آمد هنر پوشیده شد صد حجاب از دل به سوی دیده شد. Anger and lust make a man squint-eyed. غضب و شهوت آدم را قیجنه. And force the spirit to go astray from its right path. When self-interest comes or overcomes, virtue disappears and 100 veils from heart rises to the eyes. Two things destroy a man, any man: rage and carnal desire for wealth and sex. When one grows greedy and selfish, one loses a spiritual sight and love of divine and the creation. And then you are, maybe you're called Abd, Rahman, but probably you're the opposite in essence. So the cover, the appearance, doesn't mean anything. The name doesn't stand if it is not true, if it is fake. Welcome to the true name of the Hazara Pioneers Library on Amunji Strategy at Mechidtv, presenting to you A Vizier's Daughter by LILLIAS Hamilton. And this is presented to all the Nosago and Bakulo and Ajego and the grandparents and the grandchildren of the Hazara communities around the world. Wherever you may be, welcome to Chapter 8 of Hazara, the Hazara War, a tale of the Hazara War. The clouds darken. Summer had given place to autumn, autumn to winter, and the winter snow had already melted in the valleys. Flocks and herds innumerable again covered the lower slopes of the hills. For the grass was green as green could be. The air was clear, the sky blue as the year before and the year before that. And nothing seemed changed or likely to be changed. Round the year, same clock is running in the Hazara lands, in the valleys, same life. Time did but little work in those unfrequented valleys. رفت آمد نیه کس نمورا نمایه. زمان جامد شده. The جمود رفته. Only some useless old body had here and there been laid to rest. یک پایدمانی گو کومینگر نمیگو پیرکس پای من باز نفسش که برشودونو منج گور کده شده یک داره. سنگام درش اشته یک دو گور اونجا یک دو قبر اونجا. And in some of the houses, a new inmate had made his or her appearance, little welcomed or noticed by other inmates of the household. دزو جغرافیایی دا زندانی جغرافیایی هزارستان دزو کوهستان ها که 6 ماه هموترم جغرافیات رو لاک کده اشتا ایجا رفته نمیتونی برفه وقتی هر سال یکو نو زوزات میشه در خانه مگه زوزات شده چندان بودم که تکار نیه که زوزات شده دیگه. These were the natural events of everyday life and excited no more comment than did the fall of snow. زوستو پیدا شده یا برف کده یک گبه کدام گب زیاد مهمه فرق نداره and less than the strength of the spring or autumn gales. Nor were they half so important or of such general interest even to the persons most nearly concerned. پدر مادرشم چندان غمش نبود یک نو زوزات شده در خانه گفتم کاری چیز کمال کردین زوزات کردین. For centuries nothing is changing, so a new birth is coming. It is frozen again in time. Children born in the year of unusually heavy snows or some especially devastating gale before a date, the others had none except as they might be younger or older than the dated children. تاریخ اصلا نیه بله نامه کس که تو تاریخ پیدایش تو کیا کس دیگه نیه فقط امو حادثات و واقعاتی که دوری سال مشه مربوط به زو که یعنی مثلا از یعنی طوفان پیش پیدا شده بازو بچه از او رزتره اره دختر ما از او اره اون مرخم. So there is no precise timing, no calendar. If so unusual an inquiry was made as to the age of any individual, the answer could be arrived at after a good many arithmetical calculations. صبر کو توی مشه شش زمستو پیش بود امی پیداش داد طوفان نم داد تول را. Well, he was born in a year or two before that great storm. And when was the great storm would be the most natural rejoinder. ای طوفان کایم دادمی؟ التاریخ ازو معلوم نیه. بس مگه the great storm that was 6 winters before it snowed blood. ای یک شش تایستو پیش از امی برف کننده برفی طوفانی خطرناک برف. Good gracious, when was that? او کی بود؟ That was the winter before the AMIR Sahib came from Russia. وزیر جان مگه ای یک زمستو پیش از امدوی امیر کابل از روس. اینی کلکولیشن کلندره دیگه که مثلا کی پیداش ده معلوم نیه. حساب کتاب شده می واقعاتی طبیعت nature مربوط به میشه. So there you had your date as nearly as you were likely to get one. And it was seldom you got as near as that. But this is discretion. 2 men in all the country around felt that to these changed scenes a change was coming. بزی کلی مملکتی ازره 2 نفر دمی فکره که خیلی چیزا در حال تغییر استه. بوی من اندرو اوزاره میبینه حس من اندرو. Both knew that war was imminent. جنگ شده نیه. The one was full of hope. یک از اینا کاملا پر امیده که بخیر ما بردنی ای جنگ را. He felt the change was to be for the better. More power, more riches, and consequently greater luxury. The other foresaw nothing but disaster. ولی دیگه نفر فقط میبینه که تباهی و بربادیه. Defeat and ruin. The one busied himself in every township for miles around. او که پریمود بود رفت میلها ده من ازی ده دزو ده ها دزی ده ها دزو قریه پرمیده میخواه که جنگ ببره دیگه. And where he could not find time to go himself, there he sent emissaries stirring up the people. نمایندار ای که خوش گرفته نتونست. بر تمام را خبر کرد که برای جنگ آماده باشی دیگه. Filling them with more religious zeal than any casual observer would have believed those wiry little creatures capable of. خب چندان حیثیت هم نداره چندان زندگیم نیه. بازو جوش و جذبه عقیدتی رو که اینا استفاده کرده من یزی exciting their bitterest hatred amongst the men who had declared himself their lawful ruler. و امیر خود را امیر اعلان کرده ده ضد زو چنان نفرت پراکنی، چنان عقده سازی، تنفر اندازی بر بنیاد احساساتی دینی، عقیدتی، مذهبی از یک مردمی که در زندان جغرافیا بنده، یعنی frozen minds, and who moreover belonged to a different section of the Mohammedan religion, از یک دیگه فرقه اسلام. The other sat in his house and brooded. او که ناامید شده بود، تباهی رو میدید همه در کنجگر دم کنج خانه پرتاوین میرخم در فکره. He at least seemed to have changed already. تغییر قبول کرده بود، تن داده بود که تغییر شده نیه و ما احساس شده در نشان میداد. اونو منجه در کنجی خانه منجه کنجگر شده بود. این نفر شما میشناسین دیگه. Changed from being even tempered, full of anecdotes and gaiety, fond of sport and exercise, to a man morose, silent, preoccupied, who seldom left his home. خانه بندی که خود خورد دیق، پریشان، خاموش، اونو منجی. از کدام شخصی که تا امروز پر از زندگی بود. سپورتس. یک شخصیت اینقدر زنده دل مورا اینقدر مرده دل میشه. تغییر کرده نه؟ زمین ده آسمان خورده. What are you doing here, blocking up the place where I'm busy? چیز کار منی تو اینجی مره کار که دو نمیلی؟ His wife said to him one morning. What am I doing here? He had replied angrily. That's a strange question to ask a man in his own house. از مردی که پرسان این ده خانه خشته مگه تو چرا این شته؟ Father, I wish you could do something for me, Gul Begum said, coming to the rescue as she now seemed so often obliged to do. فهمید دختر که اینجا باز خونجیگری میشه، باز همات میانجیگری که پدر خود گفت پدر یک کم کار دارم درد. What? Do you want to get rid of me too? He said sadly. No, father, certainly not, she replied, trying to be gay and seating herself half behind him so that she could get her arms around him and at the same time lay her hand on his shoulder. But the sheep must be looked after. My grandfather has, I hear, a fine flock of Kohistani sheep. We want some new blood in ours. I wish you could go down and see what exchanges you could make. I could let them have some fine cows. Or if they won't exchange, you might buy a ram or two. And she whispered something in his ear. Gabra daur media. Muga chtor bori kem بزای کوهستانی که عجیمه کلو خوش داشت از او بخریم از تین منطقه. He smiled and pulled her cheek caressingly. کومشیر کشمنا. I was keeping it all for your wedding, he said playfully. اونا بری جیزی استویشتم که بخیر عرصی کنی. My wedding? I see it is you who want to get rid of me. نالی فهمیدم که تو دیل تسته که جان خور از من خلاص کنی. So that is all you care about me. Is it? She said, pouting. Well, just to punish you, I'll make you spend it on sheep. I don't mean to do that, he said, coming suddenly stern. There will be enough to do with what little money we can collect soon. پیسه را کار نگر. قد زو سیار کاراش داری. Yes, much to do, she said, laughing still and trying to ignore his sudden change of manner. For I want a camel as well as the sheep. We really need it, father. You have not half looked after the animals lately. Listen, Gul Begum, he said, I will exchange whatever you like. And if you have sheep to sell, I will sell them for you. But I won't spend money. On that, I'm quite determined. Her mother had by this time gone outside. She was busy washing the cooking utensils. But Gul Begum looked sharply around the room as though making sure there were no listeners near. Father, what is it? She asked eagerly. I know there is something wrong. You have been full of anxieties and troubles for months, ever since you came back from Kabul. You went away so merrily. What has made you so despondent since your return? He hung his head. His plans, his hopes, his ambitions, his dreams passed in review before his mental vision. Where were they now? He threw back his arm and drew the girl closer to him and then kissed her on the forehead, but said nothing. And so they sat in the happy silence that can only exist where there is true sympathy. He reveling in the tender love which she poured out upon him from the fullness of her warm young heart. And she full of trust and confidence in his strength and wisdom. Contented not to know if he did not wish her to, though she guessed pretty nearly the cause of his trouble, it was his wife's entrance that broke the spell. She said nothing. She did not even look. Her very presence, it was that chased away the repose. I'll go today, Gul Begum, he said, and see about those sheep. It suits me pretty well. I have other business down there that I can see about at the same time. Morum malaram badalnum. His daughter looked at him lovingly. They were all the world to each other. She had felt instinctively that change and active employment was the best thing for him. And though manlike, he had not quite seen through her little artifice. He felt her sympathy and was warmed and comforted by it. He was gone 6 weeks. Gul Begum shash afta musha girafta. 6 long weeks it seemed to his daughter. But Gul Begum yakuni ma khayli dur daraza. And when he returned, he had thrown off much of his silence and dejection. He seemed, in fact, full of activity. He brought home his mother-in-law, and she had some terrible tales to tell. Her home was in a village, close to the border of the AMIR's country. Ali Khusur Madari, Wazir Sahib Kesta, Mantiqish Nizdigi, Mulgi Amira. And one morning, the chief of the village had received a message from a man calling himself Colonel Farad Shah. دزو دهات زنا یک پیغام ریمش از طرف Colonel Farad Shah, saying that he would presently arrive there with a body of 50 sawars, قد 50 cavalry, Momin, and that houses and provisions were to be procured for them without delay. جاي نشيمن جور كرين خانمان نانمان تيار كت كي مو قد 50 سوار ماي دراو. The chief of the village, fully realizing the necessity of gaining time, आलिو दिस्पाइशी हुकुम कदा वक्त में खाया, first dispatched private hurried messenger in all directions, नुमाइंदा रहीन हर तरफ बुरत तमाम खबर के, summoning aid from the surrounding villages, and next sent a courteous reply by the colonel's servant to the effect that this was a difficult season to provide for so many at so short a notice. I زمستور سایکو سایب یخدر نفریار که بایری مو نداری چیزی نه خردوز خود مو نداری. But he had sent his servants to see what could be collected, and he had no doubt that if the villagers were fairly well remunerated for the inconvenience to which they would be put, such food and accommodation as the village provided would be placed at the colonel's disposal. هم مجبور شد که باید تمام را دیات خبر کنه که نینال نام دنیا باید نار جای نشین من از جور کنی خدمت کنی نار. In reply to this inoffensive message, بسیار مؤدبانه میتر جواب ریکت صاحب که ما کوشش منیم که میتر جای جور کنیم فعلا خیلی زود شما دیگه دکار دارین و ایدی آب و هوا نمیشه. In reply to this inoffensive message, the village chief received the following, brought by 3 soldiers. Jawab Meira, Sayyidina Askar. Give these 3 men every facility for finding out for themselves what provisions and accommodations your village contains. إيسي نفارا خو ميتنين نگاه کنین خوب خدمت کنین خودان جم جای خور جورنا هم مفهمه که چیز خوراکر جم کدنیه. And be prompt in assisting them. زود باشین. Should they be delayed or put to any inconvenience, agar zahmat kadin, azab kadini, says Karmara, I will send such messengers in the afternoon as are sure to be listened to. Baz ma ek chand chizai digara baad chash tarai kadinim ki unar shuma khub baz gapshir goshtin. The soldiers were rude. Isipaya askara khayli battamiz. Naturally. And dictatorially demanded tea and sugar at once. Chai shakar bhai zut. And a good solid meal later on. Khub se naan badazu. Fresh meat they must have. Taza, halal kin. And rice and bread. And what else did the village contain? In the meantime, they would inspect the houses. All right. The houses were not yet clean, they were told. All right, then we will see them dirty. Was the insolent reply. Pray be seated. The Mir said courteously. The tea will be here directly. It must not arrive during your absence. For if it stands too long, it will be cold. Then we can have fresh tea made. One of the soldiers said surlily. Of course you could, their unwilling host replied. But that would delay you again. Was chai bayram was karshim ban mufta. And we have orders from your most honorable colonel that you are not to be delayed. Muhtaram Colonel sahib Farad gufta ki shuma bayad diga Azab nashnin. You have too much to say, huh? Another of the soldiers answered, you are here to obey. We are to command. Now show us your house. And then we will go on and look at others. Have the water for the tea kept boiling. And when we come back, we'll soon have what we require. Famidi, pishu. The wretched man walked dejectedly back to his house. He felt that in the meantime there was no use resisting. And he could only long and pray for the arrival of his friends from the neighboring villages. Why? You've hardly rooms in the whole place sufficient to house us decently. You'll have to clear all these houses here. Those pigstays you can keep. Oh, they do well enough for Hazaras, but they don't suit us. You can have my house, certainly, the Mir said politely. I'll see about getting my women and children decently provided for directly. But all these houses you cannot possibly have. There would not be a respectable woman or child under shelter tonight. And the spring winds are not over yet. Those huts you have rejected are the herd's dwellings. We could not sleep in those, even were there accommodations for so many people in them. Can possibly. That sounds pretty calm, one of the Afghans returned. It's wonderful what is possible at times. Do you see this? Shamshir Khurna, drawing his sword. It is wonderful how quickly this little instrument clears houses. Don't be in too great a hurry, one of the others whispered. Remember, we are 3 to God knows how many. Then aloud, first he said quietly, come, we'll have our tea now. And by the time we have finished, we shall expect to find those houses cleaned and ready for us. But when they had had their tea, all of the houses were of course not cleaned. تمام خانه پاک شده تیار نبود. The Mir's was. خانه میر تیار بود. However, deserted. هیچ کس نبود من خانه. I have sent my wife and children to my sister-in-law. خانه خسر بریخ رگدم. زوستای خود خورا خانه از ما تیار ده خدمت شما. He said with well-assumed civility, my dwelling is at your disposal. بفرمایید. خانم ده اختیار. And where is your sister-in-law's house, pray? One of the Afghans asked with almost unbearable impudence. It's there, through that gateway and down that lane. Why? Cursed be your fathers, but Padarshimar Nalachna, there is one of the houses we told you to make ready for us. What do you mean by turning them into one of the houses we have selected? They must have shelter somewhere, the Mir replied passively. I see no necessity for any such thing, the other answered. And as he spoke, he struck his host on the head and then kicked him. Put your Hazaras where you like. That's nothing to us. But clear out the houses we have pointed out, every one of them. And be sharp about it too. Zuchubaro. The Hazara seemed in no wise to resent the abuse he had received. Great man in his house, in his own village, though he was, the fact being that he was biding his time. He was waiting the arrival of his neighbors. Where are all your men? One of the soldiers said, noticing the scarcity in the streets. Where are they all gone to? They're all on the hills tending their flocks at this time. I might send some of the boys to fetch them. Then they could help to clear those houses for you. There was a sense of triumph in his heart. Yes, he would send the boys to hurry up the men who were to help him to expel these unwelcome guests. Little did the Afghan soldiers know what he was thinking. In the meantime, he ordered another and then another house to be cleared and seemed himself most active in ordering the people out. Not active enough, however, for the Afghan soldiers who kept pouring volleys of abuse on him. His immediate relations and his ancestors, extending those same attention also to the relatives and ancestors of his wife and others. But padarnalat burzich tez but padari kalanitur nala chopat padari falanitur. And those were زبيتت شاك دريك بور خلي قرار بيزتيم جاري خانيم در خالي خانم در خالي مشان. One of the soldiers struck him in the open street and knocked him over. زد زمين شدا. This was more than his woman. خاتون زوز بال سيل مقدر. At any rate could stand, and one of them from a window overlooking the street as a kilkin threw out a hatchet. The blow was well aimed. The instrument was heavy. It cleft the wretched. It cleft the wretched Afghan through the shoulders close to the neck, an inch. This was the signal for a general onslaught. Hamla diga, which ended in the wounding of both the remaining soldiers, but more than one Hazara lay on the ground, never to rise again. In a fire a few of the men from the other village arrived. Sore pressed, the two remaining Afghan soldiers made for the open. And as soon as they had found their horses, mounted and were off at full gallop in the direction from which they had come. Their companion remained where he had fallen. جوش ميدا. His lifeblood pouring from him. خونم درائية ديگه. What brought you here? A Hazara woman asked. برای چیزم دیگه؟ The orders of my colonel. أمر كده بود colonel صاحب. The wounded man replied, for the love of God and our prophet, give me some water. خدا و پیغمبر بیدی مرا کم آو بیدی که مردم زخمی در آمگا. Give you water, said a heavy little man, no crueler or fiercer than the rest, but with a stolid, immovable Hazara face. Give you water? Look around and see the water you gave us. Look at our dead. Yes, give him water, a woman called out. Bidi shi rakam au bidi. Give him water he deserves. On mu au ki khord ziya. And she stuffed his mouth with the blood-stained mud in which he was laying. Mu gil ki puras khunj da mu da danj muft ma yana au bukhor. The poor fellow could not resent it, less still resist. He sank back, but the fury of the people had been aroused. And they poured it forth on their suffering, dying enemy. May you be tortured in hell. The muqari jahannam boftitu, as you have tortured me today. The wretched man called out, tortured with fire. Ilai busozi. Ah, fire, ah. Atish khub gabzadi, shouted another. A good idea for that. Come, let us burn him. And so they did. Burned him as he lay there completely at their mercy. But they did not triumph long. Suddenly, shriek after shriek, the shriek of children rent the air, then the cries of women. The dogs, the dog wolves are on us. Fly to the houses, children, fly. But the children were paralyzed with fear. And knew not where they ran. The dogs were indeed on them. The huge Afghan dogs, bred in Kabul, half wolf, half boar-horde. Creatures than which nothing could be more bloodthirsty or more cruel, as they sprang first on this child and then on that, tearing them, wounding and killing, but stopping nowhere to do more. It was the work to which they were trained by their master, and they obeyed him well. The streets ran blood. Then there came another sound, the sound of horses' hoofs. The voices of men, the clatter of arms. The Colonel Farad Shah and his men entered the village. Ahmad. One glance, and all was clear to him. He saw the charred remains of the wounded men, the corpses, the wounded, suffering, dying children, but these did not appease him. His blood was hot, and he was known all over the country, among his friends as well as among his foes, to be the most relentless, cruel monster that ever assumed human shape. یعنی وحشت و بربریت که در صورت انسان ما او رقم دیگه کس ندید مثل فراد شاوری. Yes, cry, cry. You shall have something to cry for. Pull down that straw. Onu kara chapaku, he shouted. Hey, bring the hay. That will burn as well. Set it alight here, quick. Bring straw and lights. We'll roast these swine alive. We'll give them a warm shelter. We'll teach them how to treat us in the future. These low Shias. But on what followed, let us draw a veil. بعد از او کی فرمان جاری کرد و از چیز کار کرد او را بیل بلیش پرده. Enough. Then the village streets ran blood. That the light of the burning stacks and houses attracted the attention of the countryside for miles. تمام الدهات در مخورد از میل دور دودو آتش زیر گرفته بود. That the shrieks of the victims startled the returning shepherds. چوبانا قد مالك بس میمد وحشت میگرفت وقتی نزدیک دهات میمد از فریاد. And made them pause to consider what was going on. That they were then met by some half-demented fugitives. Yego Ferrari, Nimcha, Langolash, Yeg Ferrari taraf da khabar nahi kuch amara. Flying anywhere, they cared not in which direction. From their blackened hearts, where all they had held most dear lay soaked in blood or roasted on funeral piles. هرچی که عزیز داشتن، هرچی که دلشی بودن، عزیزایشی، زندگیشی، تمامشی، تا یک آتش سوزان که مثل یکو پادشاه را تو درو میخوایی که الوداع بگی. The size of which would have done honor to a dead sovereign. And a footnote, I once asked an Afghan, in no way connected with this story, غیر زی اگه میتر دزی داستان تعلق نداره. ما یک از افغان پرسان کردم یک زمان لیلیس همیلتون یک نوت نوشتن اینجا داستان برشدیم. What sort of a man Colonel Farhad Shah has been? چی نظر داره برای Colonel Farhad Shah? For answer, he threw up his hands above his head and exclaimed, "Oh, that creature was not a man. He was not a human being at all. He was a bear. We khirs with khirs. Na, khirsam na. Worse, but taras khirs. For when a bear kills, he does it to defend himself. Yadi difai khoya guna far muksha, or to provide himself with food. Yak bari khordan. I mean, do dalil dara ki yak khirs mora shikarna. But that man killed that he might have the pleasure of witnessing human terror and suffering in all its most agonizing forms. He and his dogs were fit companions for one another. Yani Farhad Shah, they sabi Kalami Hazrati Maulana, in the essence of Rumi, برای شما گفتیم که خشم و شهوت مرد را احول کند. این الخشم و شهوت را توسیل کو که دمنه فرهاد شاه یمی کارل فرهاد شاه کرداره که درو انتر مشه من هزار لندز اینمی دیگه اونم نمونهشیه که تو در غضب کسته خوش تو باید که تو چقدر غضب نازل چقدر کرب پیدا میتونی چقدر وحشت میتونی در چهره دیگه انسان ببینی و خوش شونی. چون غرض آمد هنر پوشیده شد صد حجاب از دل به سوی دیده شد. عزیزان من the enemy the Farad is here in the heart of every one of us. When anger and lust together it is fire everywhere. That is the war on heart and mind. The question still remains, are you a warrior in a garden or a gardener in a war? Hai kido Nowroz Zawar, hai kido Nowroz Zawar.